Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity. This time here on BIMThoughts, we have Carl Storms, Dana DeFilippi, and Anthony Remis.
How you doing?
You made it.
Yes.
Define yourself.
Well, my name's Anthony Remis, and I own and operate Remis Computer Solutions out here in Vegas, Nevada, where the focus is really about building high-performance workstation computers.
Really?
Yes, sir.
So, other than being on BIMThoughts, what's your second best thing that's happened to you this year?
Man, actually, it's kind of actually started more in 2020, but we really got into camping a whole lot more.
Oh, yeah?
Picked up an RV, and we've just been trying to make memories before our kids are older and don't want to spend time with us anymore.
What kind of RV did you get?
We have a cool little travel trailer. It's a 19-foot GeoPro 19BH. So the boys have a little bunk bed set up, and it met the requirements. My wife wanted a shower and restroom.
Yes.
I'm tired of using all the park facilities. So
yeah, I don't blame her whatsoever.
Yeah, but it's been a blast, and we love it.
That's great. I got a Jeep this year, a Wrangler.
Ooh,
so
nice.
I'm going out and exploring the wilderness. I'm thinking about getting a tent and see if I like camping again. I'm going to get a cheapy tent to put on the ground to start. And if I like it, then I'll spend the $2,000 for the rooftop tent.
That was going to be my question to you.
Yeah, because $2,000, knowing me, I'll use it twice.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
No.
And they'll cut into your fuel mileage a little bit.
Yeah, and they make a noise.
Yeah, they're super cool to sleep in. Our first little travel trailer had one. It was more like a teardrop style.
Yeah.
And you really feel like you're in like a tree house.
Huh.
It's awesome, but they're so expensive.
Yeah. So computers, you make computers or you assemble computers.
Yes.
Is more like it. But you, I would assume, you do the research and figure out what parts work best with each other and all that other good stuff other than just grabbing what's available.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the business started in 2015, and I honestly thought it was going to be more, gaming oriented, but my very first business client was a Revit user, and that's kind of how I ended up in this space.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all about using quality components. I used to be really big into the overclocking as well. But as these components, the CPUs are so optimized out of the box, you got to go through extreme lengths to really get your value out of overclocking today. So I consider it more like performance tuning is what I do. I'll increase the TDP limits so the CPUs could operate at their factory settings for longer, and just really optimize it as a whole system rather than just trying to hit the check boxes and it has a great CPU, but then the motherboard is inadequate or whatnot.
Right. My latest computer that I purchased, you probably won't like it, but it is what it is a MacBook Air M1, and I am digging this thing. Of course, you can't do anything to it afterwards, hardware wise, after you buy it. So you gotta buy it equipped, and it's an amazing device. My other computer, let me click on it. I'm going to Performance Mangler or Task Manager, and I'm hitting Performance, and I have an AMD Ryzen 9 3900X 12-core machine, 64 GBs of RAM, overclocked to 4 gigahertz, and a SSD Gen 4 drive in it. And I'll say the Mac keeps up with it. I don't notice a difference in speed.
Yeah, that's very close to my actual personal system right now.
Really?
I just have the updated 3900 XT, which they increased the clock speed a little bit, but once the availability is a little better on the Ryzen Zen 3, I'll probably end up upgrading, but I keep my inventory for client use. But I would say like the new stuff from AMD and even Intel, their single core performance, it's quite noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Even just opening stuff like Chrome or Internet Explorer, it really just snaps at you.
Yeah, I find the single core performance better in Intel than I do in AMD.
That has been the case until Zen 3 came out, which is like the 5000 series.
Uh-huh.
Then AMD just destroyed Intel.
Really?
Intel regrouped and caught up essentially, but in doing so, they shaved off 2 cores. So you used to get an i9 with 10 cores. Now it's an i9 with 8 cores. But the single core is now up to speed about with what AMD is doing. It's just if you need cores, AMD is still king, and you have the benefit of really good clock speeds.
Mm-hmm. So what should a Revit user be looking for in a new workstation or new laptop?
Hands down, it's all about that single core performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really focus on your CPU. So Intel 11th generation or AMD Zen 3, which is their 5000 series. The laptop market is so skewed with model numbers, you really have to pay really close attention there. But you really want the fastest single core performance you can get for Revit. And video card, depending on what you're doing, you don't need a whole lot. I mean, for a desktop user, if you could actually find one, I mean, a GTX 1660 Super, it's supposed to be a $350 card, would do just great in Revit. One of my clients was skeptical. I literally gave them a demo of it, and they were rotating models and using Navisworks, and even like walking through a model in Lumion, they were just really surprised because their budget was quite limited, but it worked out well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're more into Lumion, Twinmotion, Enscape, you just scale your video card. I try to tell clients shop VRAM first, because if you don't have enough video RAM for visualization, then you're gonna not enjoy life very much.
So how much video RAM should they have for Lumion or Enscape?
I mean, I would like at least 8 gigs of
Mm-hmm.
VRAM. That's kind of the safe place to be right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it all depends on the client and like the assets they're using and the complexity of their models. And that's such a personal question and that's always something I ask a client when we're going through the consultation process.
Mm-hmm.
But as a default, 8 gigs is a sweet spot. Some people are fine with 6 gigabytes if they're doing smaller projects, and it just really depends, like how they're using their software.
So is that something that you can update yet or upgrade yet? Like we know you can on some machines you can upgrade your regular RAM, but as Bill said on his new iMac, everything is kind of fixed, like buying a phone. But
Right.
is video RAM something that you can update yet, or is it kind of you buy it if you need more, you have to replace the whole unit, the whole GPU?
So you can't upgrade that. Yeah, there's been people that have proved that NVIDIA's deliberately limiting their VRAM because they've soldered on extra modules and the card recognized them.
Hmm.
But you got to imagine, like, I mean, that's board level repair kind of. I mean, you really have to be an expert and understand the schematics. And I don't even know where you'd get the schematics because it's so hard to get anything for, that's another topic of right to repair. But you can't, normal people can't upgrade the RAM, the VRAM.
Fair enough. And I guess we're getting to the stage again, going back to Bill's new iMac, that we're in an age where it's almost becoming like our phones are with a workstation, with the way software and everything's changing, that maybe we're no longer on that corporate 5-year or 3-year cycle. We're trying to get machines a little less upfront, but cycle through them a little more. Are you finding that's changing, or are companies still trying to keep that machine for 3, 4, 5 years to keep it running?
I know on my clients, typically I'm seeing the 4 to 5 year mark is when they replace systems. What's more common is a lot of my clients tend to be growing more than replacing computers. But the CPU market, which is really the focus for Revit, it's been quite stale until the last maybe 2 years. Things got exciting. So all you were really buying were just updated model numbers with maybe 100 megahertz. So for a long period of time, a 4-year-old computer wasn't very different than what a new one was like, if you were using good components to begin with. Whereas if you have a 3-year-old computer today and you upgraded to a new computer, the difference would be very substantial, I would say. But I would say people are still in that 4 to 5 year life cycle mentality.
So we've talked about the CPU and how there's been some changes recently, but for a long time, it's just been small stuff. So you're able to sort of keep using that same machine. If we focus on the things we can change, hard drives and RAM, and again, we've talked about earlier focusing on a Revit machine. If you got a good CPU, but you were strapped for cash, so you got an old 1 terabyte spinner and you got 8 gigs of RAM, what are you changing first?
SSD, upgrade to an SSD immediately. That'll make any computer light years better to operate. I haven't built a system with a hard drive as the primary system in probably the last 6 years, I think, just because prices have come down a lot. So if you're on a laptop, for example, and you have a spinning drive, replace that with an SSD and your laptop will feel night and day different. Regarding RAM, aside from page filing, eating, into things, but really you just need as much as you need. RAM is basically the size of your desk, and if you have a tiny desk and you're fumbling around with your papers and you're putting stuff on the floor, you're going to work slower. But if you have the right size desk, you got space to put everything, you're going to work more efficiently. And if you have a massive desk, there's just a lot of space you're not using. That's kind of how RAM works for the computer.
I think that's a good analogy. I haven't heard that before with the desk, but it kind of makes sense, and it's a very visual way to look at it. How much space you need versus what you're using.
Right. Windows, though, likes to sometimes double. Like if you have 64 gigs of RAM, sometimes you'll get a really excessively large page file. I think things have gotten a little better with that, but that's the only thing. Sometimes you got to be careful with what Windows tries to do with page file with large sets of RAM. But otherwise, yeah, RAM, you just need what you need.
So, used to be, I would say 5 years ago, the best thing you could do for your PC to get it to perform well is to upgrade the hard drive to solid state. But today, all new computers have solid state drives. And if they don't, you bought the wrong one.
Right.
Right? But what's the best bang for the buck? What should we upgrade today if we want to get more speed?
I think personally the thing that affects your user experience the most today is it's just the CPU.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, but that also, like, it's hard for me to just say one component because I look at a computer as a system.
Right.
Kind of like an engine. Like, well, if you get those forged pistons, you could, do this or that. But then if you don't have the right intake or heads or the other supporting or the right camshaft, it's all a waste of money. So it's hard for me to just itemize one item where I say you need a good CPU, but if you don't have a good CPU cooler, that CPU isn't running to its max potential.
Oh, yeah.
So a big problem with some of the big box builders is they focus on hitting the marketing checkboxes where they'll actually give you a good CPU, they'll give you a good capacity of RAM, and they'll even give you a good SSD, but then it's in a chassis that has no airflow. The CPU cooler is inadequate, and you're wondering why this expensive system doesn't work properly, and that's simply because it's unbalanced. The cooling isn't adequate for the components inside. The other thing too, I would say, if you already have a system, upgrading to a larger capacity SSD, people think that SSDs don't suffer from speed degradation. The fuller they get, they kind of do. It just happens later on. Where like a spinning drive, once you're at 50%, you start dropping off in performance. SSDs once you're like at 80, 90%, they start choking also. And I was on the Revit forum online, and someone was on there complaining that their IT department specs their systems with 120 gigabyte drives. so that they do not have space to put personal files on the systems.
So that's a good way of giving them admin rights on their workstation, but yet they can't do anything with the admin rights because there's no space left.
Right, and unfortunately, that causes issues because as updates come out and so on and so forth, different versions of Revit are released.
Right.
So
your collaboration cache gets full.
Oh yeah, and I try to get people on 1 terabyte drives as the standard solution, just for that reason alone.
And there's not really a big price difference between 512 and 1 terabyte.
No, not anymore. And
it's not double anymore. It's a lot less than double.
One of my favorite drives to use for value, while I do focus on high performance, I mean, I still try to meet clients' budgets. And the Crucial P2 series, it's an NVMe drive. That's an M.2 NVMe drive. And the 1 terabyte version's $125.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You waste more than that in a day just waiting for Revit to load.
Oh yeah, and it's not as fast as like the Samsung NVMe drives,
right?
But it's faster than a normal SSD. And going from the 500 gigabyte version to the 1 terabyte version, it's like less than $40 difference. It's not, or it's about $40 to $50 difference, and it's just not. Your time's more valuable than that is the point.
It's not only that your time is more valuable than that. It's like I say when we travel, it's the stress level is more valuable too.
Right.
To me, the stress level is as equal to or greater than the time and the money. If I'm sitting stressed and trying to get something done because I'm waiting for my computer, that's no fun. Nobody got time for that.
Oh man, one of my clients in Costa Mesa, really the one that started it all for me, in the Revit Space, I remember dropping off a workstation for them, and most of my clients are out of state now, but it was when I would actually do local drop-offs, it was so funny watching the architect just smile, watching how fast the system was working. Simple stuff like right-clicking on a model and seeing the menu pop up faster. I mean, it was silly, but the stress level you go through in waiting minutes to open a model up, it's I just don't think it's a good experience.
No, it isn't. I was thinking, I think we need to start looking more too at the performance past the workstation. Not above the keyboard performance, but like the network performance or the internet speed. And I think internet speed is the next big, is your next big thing to upgrade, now that I think about it. Because I upgraded to gigabit at home, but when I go to like someone else's house and they don't have it, it's like, how do you put up with this? But with BIM 360 or whatever they're calling it tomorrow, I mean, you're downloading those models from the internet, so you could have the fastest machine ever made, but if your internet speed is 512 megabits per second or 512K for that matter, you're not going to get very good performance. You're not going to get the performance you want in opening up that model.
I agree. And just because you slap a business, a business associated with the address, it's crazy how much more expensive it gets.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know, in developed cities across the country here, our internet speeds are extremely bad in some areas, where you might be paying several hundred a month or over $1,000 a month, and the home user around the corner still has faster internet than you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it all depends on the wire coming up to your building.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the bottleneck, I think, for these cloud services at the moment.
Yeah. Especially once we all start getting back into the office, which is happening sooner than later right now. We're going to have to start, IT departments are going to have to really look at their internet speeds to figure out how to get that increased, because we all switched from server-based files to cloud-based files during this great adventure we went through the last year and a half, because we needed our end users to have access to files. And now we're going to have this hybrid working approach. I think most offices are going to be that way, where People are going to have the flexibility to work from home or work in the office, but the files are still going to have to be cloud-based on that. And so you may have better performance at home than you have in the office.
No, I agree with you there. And yeah, it's really a big issue. I think also how the ISPs all share the lines and everything too.
Right. What about in the office network speeds? Are you seeing people jumping to 10 gig or 2.5 gig or?
This kind of enters the realm of their local IT or their IT provider. Most of my clients are still on 1 gigabit network cards, and very few are asking about 10 gig solutions. But there is a move to that. I'm noticing with some firms, the ones that are really diving into the visualization and they start creating, animations for some of these projects. But it's not as common as I would have thought by now.
Yeah. Let's switch back a little bit to trying to find the bottleneck, because we've mentioned a bunch of different things that you could look at, increase your hard drive speed, increase your network speed, get a graphics card. But what's the best way for a normal user to figure out where the bottleneck is?
So this kind of goes into understanding what your software is asking your computer to do. A program I like to recommend to my clients, if it's like a software I haven't, because I do stuff outside of like the AEC industry, so or even specific users. I'm starting to do a lot more laser scan builds, and it's new users and they don't understand what they're going to be doing or whatnot. I recommend a program called MSI Afterburner. It's a program that will log everything your CPU is doing. It'll log what your video card is doing. It reports your clock speeds. It really records so much information that's useful, and you could actually export it to a file and review it later. So if you wanted to run it for 24 hours and kind of review how your day went, you could see exactly what your CPU is doing. If you see one core constantly maxed at like 90% or higher, and the other ones aren't working, you'll realize, okay, I have a single core bottleneck. I need more clock speed. If you see your CPU pegged constantly on all cores at 75% or higher, you may benefit from more cores or faster cores than what you already have. And then if you notice like you're bouncing off your RAM capacity, that's another option. Okay, I'm actually running out of RAM. But you need to see what your actual hardware is doing in order to make an educated decision on what your problem is. Because you could spend a ton of money on the wrong hardware and not improve your user experience.
Right, you sure can. And a lot of people have done that. Nowadays, in the new versions of Windows or the latest builds, you can go into Task Manager and Performance, and there's a GPU graph now where it didn't used to have that in Windows 10.
Right, and they recently added your GPU temperature to that also.
Right, and they added your GPU temperature to that too. Yeah, I guess the rule of thumb on temperature is if you can keep your coffee warm on your PC, it's a little hot.
Generally. Here's the funny thing though, and while most of my clients are engineers, sometimes I get, hey, you know what? The computer's not running cool, or the computer's running cool, but my room's getting hot. Can we go to water cool? Can we water cool it?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, your room's getting hot and your computer is cool because it's just dissipating the heat it's creating.
Right.
So, and sometimes warm coffee and a cold CPU is a good thing though.
Yeah. And water cooling really won't help the room temperature.
No, it could potentially increase it.
Right, because all it's doing is just because you go to water cooling doesn't mean you don't have a fan in your computer.
Right.
You just have a fan blowing on a radiator instead of on a heatsink.
Yeah, and these new video cards have kind of been a step back from power efficiency, where now if you have something like an RTX 3090, that's
Mm-hmm.
400 watts of power right there.
Yeah.
That's like half of what some of the smaller space heaters are, and that's just the video card alone.
Yeah.
I build computers often that when they're at full load, they might be at 900 watts or more of power consumption.
Wow.
And I actually have to educate clients that, hey, you got to start being mindful of what your circuit can deliver. And if you have older wiring, use a power conditioner.
Mm-hmm. All right, zooming back into our benchmark stuff to try to figure out how to increase the performance of our computer. The one that's voodoo still to me these days is trying to figure out hard drive. What's the easiest way to figure out if your hard drive or SSD is your bottleneck?
That's kind of tricky still. I mean, even today, ATTO is a good benchmark
Mm-hmm.
because it'll start giving you numbers for very, very small files,
Mm-hmm.
like file sizes, and then it ranges all the way up into the gigabytes. Um, just as a blanket, I like running Crystal Disk Mark, and it gives you like 4 different file sizes that it'll test for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we did testing at one point using Optane drives, NVMe drives, RAID solutions, and I honestly think the bottlenecks today if you already have a good drive, the bottlenecks is really the software.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to get software that's better coded. The problem is it's just really expensive to rewrite something.
Yes. Not only is it expensive to rewrite it, it's scary to rewrite it.
Yeah, and this is something I've spoken to with people, and some people don't even think Revit can be more multi-core than it is today.
Mm.
I don't know if these are just theories, but one of my clients that's kind of like a friend to me now, we're just talking at AU 2 years ago about it, and he just doesn't think they could do it, or if they did, it just cost way too much money and the incentive wouldn't be there.
Well, I've talked to the developers about that because I get to talk to them from time to time, and there are places where they could put more multi-core features in, but the payoff for it isn't there. The bang for the buck. Yeah, they could make it multi-core, but it really isn't going to make it much faster. And writing database stuff, you really can't write in multi-core.
Right.
Because you have to write it in order. So there's that as well. I think they're moving more towards GPU stuff in Revit. I've seen more GPU stuff nowadays than going multi-core on the processors. So GPU is a lot more important than it used to be. Of course, I say that, and I'm still running a 1080 card, but it works for what I use it for. But that's something to look at too. Is that graphics card performance? Is the graphics card pegged in its performance? And you may go. I would think you may go in your benchmarks or your task managers or your performance things and look at stuff, and nothing is bottlenecking on your workstation, but it's still running slow. That could either be the software or the network, maybe. I guess the network would tell you, the Ethernet would tell you in Task Manager.
Well, I guess also even, some people may not realize they may have a virus or something.
Right.
Viruses too.
They may be mining Bitcoin and not even know it or get the money for it.
Which has happened to people.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of this. I know it's not practical for everyone because the amount of software you guys use, but man, after a few, feature updates, man, in a perfect world, a clean install once a year would be great for Windows.
Yeah.
But also, if you are having issues and you have good hardware, check your drivers.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed when Windows if the driver is going to break, it's usually when Windows goes through a major feature update.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people are on drivers that are 2-3 years old.
Yeah.
And just that one Windows update was finally the one that did it. And Windows doesn't automatically update all your drivers.
Right. Yeah, and going to the Dell support site is not enough either to get the latest driver, because once Dell stops selling those machines, unless there's a security update, they're not going to publish a new driver for that machine. You've got to figure out, okay, it's an Intel video card. I got to go to Intel now and look for the driver, or it's a Realtek network card. Let's go to the Realtek site and see what the new version of the driver is there. You may have to go to the manufacturer of the component to get the right driver.
Oh yeah, I mean, bad drivers can cause blue screens. Also, that in Dell laptops, maybe 2 years ago, they were having a big issue with one of their drivers just blue screening, and it was the network driver.
Huh. I've seen blue screens on drivers on just the weirdest things, like fingerprint reader driver that you don't even use. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. That's nice IRQ less than or equal to or something error you get.
All right, so we've been doing a ton of talking here, getting deep into the geek out, and I think that well, definitely Anthony and Bill are getting into it. I get some of it, but I'm wondering if some of the people listening know things like GPU and CPU and RAM, but maybe are not getting into the real depths. If somebody's looking for a machine and they know they use Revit and they use Navisworks every day, and they know things like a laptop or a workstation, but they don't know anything else, can they just come to you, Anthony, and say, hey, this is my budget, this is what I need, what should I get?
Oftentimes, that's how a lot of my emails start with someone. Hey, and that's kind of what my form. I've gone away from having the cookie cutter computers listed on my site. I try to approach each client, or even somebody that's just curious. I help people all the time on forums, but that's usually how they start. But if you're out there shopping around and you're just trying to get something, and you're trying to do your own research, things like CPUs over 4 gigahertz, usually that starts to weed out the value processors versus the more serious ones. I wouldn't build a workstation with less than 32 gigabytes of RAM. So try to buy something with 32 at least. If you need more than 32, you probably know it. And 1 terabyte of SSD or NVMe M.2 storage, those are all terms. As long as it's not a spinning drive, if you see an RPM listed next to that drive, that's not the right computer.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say I fall into that category, and that's why I've been so quiet.
I wouldn't have thought that. I thought you were out there, you were geeking out.
No, I would consider myself software and not hardware.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
So let's have you ask what computer you should get.
Not only that, but I think what are maybe some common misconceptions that you find within our industry, whether that's something that we're spending way too much money on or not enough money on. Like for those of us who maybe aren't as savvy in the computer genius realm, how can we compromise with those sorts of things? Of course, like you're saying, the RAM, the graphics card, those sorts of things. But what would you say is something that you see really frequently?
So this is especially relevant with enterprise users, but I think the biggest waste of money for 98% of people would be going with a Quadro. There's some really specific situations that you do need a Quadro video card, but going with a NVIDIA GeForce video card would be a quick way to save a lot of money. And most Dell and HP and big box companies are going to spec their workstations usually with GeForce or AMD's Radeon Pro cards. And I hate to say it, but I strongly believe it's just a politics thing. For example, I can't get NVIDIA certification because I use GeForce cards in my workstations. It's just that simple. So if you're trying to save, or you're trying to be value oriented, skip the Quadro. Especially if it's just Revit. Except in today's market, it's a little unique because you might be able to buy a Quadro where all the GeForces are sold out or highly marked up. So In a normal time, I would say go GeForce. And then, just like I said, if you just needed a blanket, it would be 32 gigabytes or more, but most likely, I mean, a lot of Revit users are even fine with 16, but 32, it's cheap. You're gonna be in the safe space where that's a good amount to start with, and 1 terabyte SSD. NVMe is just a protocol. It's basically, your normal SSD and an NVMe drive could be in the same form factor. It's just really a protocol. So just to understand, so you understand what's an SSD and an NVMe drive, they're gonna look the same oftentimes. So you just want to get the right capacities primarily. With your CPU, man, I'd say 6 to 8 cores, but you want to be above 4 gigahertz. With my clients, it's a little different. This is kind of like the situation, like you're going to Costco to shop for a computer, or Best Buy, or you're on the Dell site, or you're trying to figure it all out. You want to see at least 4 gigahertz, 6 cores or more. What people, and I don't want to make this too challenging, but the way these CPUs operate, 4 gigahertz would be its peak operating speed, and you're actually getting less the more things you do. That's why I'm just trying to say, like, try to be above 4 gigahertz, because even when you see 5 gigahertz on an Intel processor, it's only at 5 gigahertz for so long. And the more things you do, it's predetermined within the CPU. Okay, now you have 4 cores, so you're going to be at this clock speed. I don't know, Dana, if that fully answered your question. I try to take the approach, usually, what are you trying to do? And then I ask, what are you currently using? So I could kind of tell, okay, if you're having a hard time and you have high-end hardware, you may not have a hardware issue. So that's kind of the approach I normally go, and then I break it down further.
No, I guess that definitely, obviously makes sense based off the fact that everybody is going to have unique needs. Like you're saying, if somebody's rendering a lot versus me who doesn't, I do just like a lot of data manipulation. So I wouldn't necessarily need maybe as high as a graphics card, for example.
And some people don't even feel comfortable downloading that software I mentioned earlier, the MSI Afterburner. I would say just open up your task manager, hit that performance tab, and when you're in the CPU tab, right-click on it and select to list all the logical cores. That's the big thing, because the way Windows will show your CPU usage, it's showing it as a whole. That will not show you if you're having a single core, single thread bottleneck. You'll look at your computer usage, I'm like, I don't know, it's at 25%. It looks great. But then if you switch that graph to show all your logical cores, you'll see like, man, 2 of them are pegged at 100%. That's your bottleneck. So even if someone just wanted to use the tools that are already on their computer, that would be like the starting point to kind of spec the right hardware.
Well, I'm sure you have a final thought, Bill.
Me? I have a final. Okay, one last question. Does it really matter on the quality of the motherboards if it's the same chipset?
Absolutely, it does. You'll find certain features like thicker, PCB designs. Higher end motherboards, they'll actually lay out the traces. So the way like your computer uses your RAM, it has to be connected. The higher end motherboards, when you see an advertisement, hey, this motherboard could run your RAM speed at 5,000 megahertz, and you're thinking, I have no intention to run that speed. The translation is they took the extra time and the extra gold to route those traces perfectly, so that whether you're using 3200 or 4000 or 5000 megahertz RAM, it's going to be the highest build quality motherboard you could get. The layouts with PCI Express lanes sometimes will be more optimized with more expensive motherboards where you might get an actual extra slot that the cheaper boards do not have. Then you get into features like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. The quality of the chipset for those. Some of them are now Intel Wi-Fi, some are Realtek. There's some others out there. Those are all features you get with more expensive motherboards. And then there's a falling off point where you're just paying for marketing and lights and RGB features. But
yeah, and who needs that?
Right, unless I could say someone that comes to mind, but some clients do like that.
Really?
Some clients actually want their computers color-coded to their office, and I love it when a client asks that.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I guess the moral of the story is just call Anthony. He'll help you out.
Yeah, if I had a closing thought, it would be definitely look at the computer as a complete system, like an orchestra of components. They all have to be, you want them all matched as well as possible for the best user experience.
Right. Otherwise, your violins are going off somewhere else.
Or they're out of tune.
On that note, let's call it an episode, shall we? It's an episode. Thank you very much, Anthony. I had a great time geeking out as usual. We'll make sure that we include all of the links on how people can contact you in the show notes.
Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.